For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Or welcome if it's your first time. I am your host Jade Black and I am aware it has been a while since I've done this, and so I thought I would give a little bit of attention as to why this sort of went on hiatus and why it's come back. So the hiatus was not planned, is really the crux of it. I got very busy with life stuff and writing stuff and also health stuff, and some of that is sorted, some of it is not. I'm not going to get into the details, but basically in the time I've not been doing this podcast, I've felt the effects of not doing it. I've been fairly open before about, this is in many ways speech therapy for me, and I've backslid, so. But today's episode is all about Mr. Nakagami, my debut, which is out now. It's a bit over a month since it released. I was planning to do an episode for release day, but obviously that didn't happen. Life and writing and health and everything, it was just, there was not time to do it. The Mr. Nakagami campaign did go a little bit off the rails for me. So I'm going to do a little reintroduction to Mr. Nakagami, since it's been a while it's been a while since I've done the podcast, and it's also been a while since I've actually talked about any of my novels in that much detail. So Mr. Nakagami is a political thriller. The final page count is 203, so 200 because there's a map in there and some other things. So it's 200 pages. It's probably the longest of the determined ones at 200 pages. And it focuses on main character Haru Nakagami, hence the name of the book. Haru is a sweet little cinnamon roll and I would die to protect him. This book spans, give or take, 40 years. He starts as a young man and by the end of the book he's 57. Which makes it actually the longest timeline in the determined ones as well. It's ever so slightly longer than Snakebite. And this is the first book published, but as I've mentioned before, but it's worth mentioning again at this point, the determined ones is not a series, it is a compendium. There is a difference, partly because, if you've been around here before, or around me at all really, you know how pretentious I am. But the idea with the compendium format is that each book is a standalone. You can pick it up, read it, put it down, complete story, complete standalone. You can just read the one, or you can read them in any order. If you read all 8 of them, you get a full overall story like you would a series. And what's also really fun, as a little bonus thing, is the more you reread, the more you get that story. So even if you just finish Mr. Nakagami, go back to page 1 and reread the book, it won't read the same way, I don't think. That's been my personal experience with it, at least. But especially if you read Snakebite and then go back to Mr. Nakagami, it feels like reading a completely different book at points. And I love that, I really do. It's one of the most fun and also brain-breaking things about the determined ones. So I wanted to talk about really how it feels to publish my debut novel, because if you've been around for a while, then you know that this isn't actually my first publication. My first publication was Count the Stars, which was a novelette featured in Shadow Sparks' Cozy-ish anthology, which came out in June 2024. So almost a full year before Mr. Nakagami, 11 months and 6 days if you want to be really precise about it. And that Count the Stars was a preview to the Determined Ones, and the main character was Isamu, who I dubbed the 8th Determined One, just because his book is releasing last. It's not anything more than that. So that was my first publication, and that felt, very surreal, very grounding, almost. It was a very weird mix of emotions, because it was very surreal to get my Cozy-ish author copy like the day after the anthology came out, pretty much, and hold this, behemoth of a book in my hands and think, I'm in here. My words are in a printed, published book, and so is a piece of my art if you get the paperback. And that was awesome. But it was also that moment of, oh man, the Determined Ones is actually happening. Like, the Determined Ones is really coming. It's really going to exist in some kind of tangible way. Which I didn't have until that moment, because yes, I'd signed a publishing contract like the September before that. August, September? I do have the exact date written down somewhere, but the best part of a year before that. And that was one thing, but actually having a physical copy of a book with something related to the Determined Ones in it was something else entirely. Mr. Nakagami feels very different again, because Count the Stars came together very, very quickly. The anthology invites were sent around at the end of 2023. I wrote the story, and then it was out and done very, very quickly, within the space of 5 months, 6 months, something like that. It was done. All over and done. Mr. Nakagami, it's been, give or take, 3 years. And obviously it's a much bigger piece of work. Count the Stars is just about 15k, whereas Mr. Nakagami is 78k. So it's more than 5 times as long, which is actually a wild thing to realise out loud. I've actually never realised that before. But yeah, it's a completely different beast, and actually the whole idea, for me personally, of the Determined Ones is the overall compendium tells this period of time. It's a smidge over 40 years, it's like 42 or something, and it's telling the story of this land over this 42, give or take, years. But within that, each book is telling a personal story. Miss Nakagami is telling Haru's story. That's how I phrased it on release day, and how it is in my new Twitter banner is Haru's story is here, Haru's story is told. Because while obviously it was in many ways done in the first draft that was way too long, and then sort of done again once final edits were submitted, which was like March or something. Actually, no, that would have been mid-April, but you get the point. Until it's properly out in the world, it's not done in the same way. It's not a finished article until the rubber stamp is on it. I've always been a bit like that. A lot of people say that releasing a book is very bittersweet. I've heard that many times because, oh, you can't change anything anymore, or, that chapter of your life is over, but I actually didn't feel that with Mr. Nakagami. I just felt this sense of happiness and sense of pride that it was done, that I'd done it, and I've done it in a way that I'm genuinely just really proud of. It was a really difficult book to write and a difficult book to edit. The cover in particular. But I'll talk about all those things in more detail, because I actually wanted to talk about how Charcoal Rain felt to release as well, because that released a little less than a month after Mr. Nakagami, so that's about a couple weeks ago today when I'm recording this. And that was another different feeling again of again, it was very surreal, and you had that same sense of pride because that was such a difficult piece to edit in particular, actually. But it didn't have that same grounding effect at all, because that's so unrelated, I guess. That's just its own random thing. And there's going to be a whole episode of this podcast about Charcoal Rain that will be coming in a couple of weeks. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That should be the next episode, she says, like she has a schedule. We know about that here. Getting back to Miss Nakagami, I want to talk about the whole process I went through with this book, because this one's so incredibly special to me. So this was the third book in the Determined Ones that I wrote, and it was the one where I really committed to what the Determined Ones is, because the first, I thought, okay, that's cut and dry, we're never visiting this world again, because that's not what I do. And then I was like, excuse me, you have questions for me, I'm willing to answer them. So that happened, and then I was too curious about Haru, and I thought, I'm never getting away from this, am I? If I take the plunge and write this book, I'm going to be here forever. And I realised that despite everything, despite how staunchly anti-direct sequel I am, I was okay with that. Because nothing is a direct sequel, because I had this other way of exploring. And I was so fascinated, it was just so all-consuming, this world and everything I loved about it. I thought, let's do it, let's keep going with this, because it's the best stuff I've ever written. It's the stuff I've cared most about writing, and there are so many reasons for that now that were always there, but I can put my finger on a bit more now. But this was also halfway through, and I do think almost exactly halfway through, I actually took a break in drafting this book, because I truly realised how much of a behemoth the Determined Ones was. I realised what I was working towards with the compendium format and what I wanted to do with the compendium format, and actually made my first lineup of what was going to be in there, which changed more than once. But honestly, it didn't change that much, it just changed as the concept of exactly what I was doing became clear and became precise. The lineup reflected that, but it only affected, like, the one book, maybe two, the one got dropped very quickly. But for the most part, one book, the 8th book, and I wasn't sure what that was, which appears to be a problem for basically any extended project I do where there's more than one story involved. Is okay, but which one? That seems to be a thing I struggle with. And I'm sure other people do as well. But when it comes to drafting Mr. Nakagami, it was such a wild concept. I've never drafted a political thriller. For one, I'd never really drafted a high politics story where the main character was in any way involved in politics, be that a politician, a diplomat, secretary, anything. I'd never done that. But also this scope of 40 years, originally 50 years. Even just figuring out how to do the chapter structure was wild, because generally with me, if you look at, the one I wrote directly before this was Black Executioner, that's I's story, that's going to be the second one coming. It's very instinctive of just, oh, this is a good point to end the chapter. It makes sense to end a chapter here, let's do it. And I still do it like that now. Done that with Shadow on the Snow, done it with Beneath the Moon. Sometimes things move a little bit. If I'm like, actually, no, the next scene would be the better place for it, because I'm that much of a pantser, I do not know what's going on. But Mr. Nakagami wasn't like that, because I had this huge scope, huge time span, and I knew that was going to be how it was from the beginning, because Haru clearly had so much backstory that needed to happen. Not quite as much as in the first draft, but I figured that I could either structure the chapters by calendar year, or I could do it by Haru's birth year, because Haru's birthday is not in January, it's in March. And eventually I decided on Haru's age, because I thought that would be easier to keep track of, because at that point I didn't know how their calendar worked. Like, straight up, I didn't know if they had 12 months, if they had 10, if they had 15, I had no idea. I'm still not entirely sure. It made more sense, given that it's character-driven, that it's his story, to focus that on him. What that led to, in the first draft, was one chapter being 23,000 words, and no, I am not making that up. It's the one chapter where I believe he's 54, that then ended up being split, funnily enough, because I just thought, I don't want to edit a 23,000 word chapter, much as anything. I just don't want to do that. I think that's a lot to ask. I don't care that much about chapter lengths, it really doesn't bother me, so long as chapters aren't like one page. There have been some books that do that really well. Annihilation 1 by Jess Moon and Randy Russell is a really good example of insanely short chapters done really, really well. But you have to be very stylistic about that, and that's not what I was doing. It's not generally what I do. I mean, I might in the future, I probably will. But short chapters I struggle with a lot more than long chapters. But it was Mr. Nakagami, when I was reading through that chapter in the 1.1 draft, I was like, this is too much. We can't be doing this. We can't have a 23,000 word chapter. So it got split into 3. Not evenly, just where it felt right. Again. But the first draft was also 110,000 words. The final, reminder, is 78. So yeah, I cut a lot out of this book, and a lot of it was just early chapters. I started too early, as I have a tendency to do. I've said that many a time, but I'll say it again, and I will say it again in future as well. I have a tendency to start too early, and a point where the story's not interesting, where little anecdotes that come up there can just be dropped in via backstory. You just don't need everything there, so that was responsible for a lot of the cuts. But a lot of the cuts were just odd little scenes and this and that I mean, I couldn't tell you what any of them are now, and I think that says enough. If they were anything I had felt sad about cutting, or anything that had actually added to the story, I'd remember them, because I had that exact experience with Penstamen, where I cut scenes and regretted it and reinstated in Penstamen's editing. It's just been a complete mess. That will be one hell of an episode when it comes out. But yeah, editing down from 110k was a lot of cuts, but actually a lot of it just made sense. A lot of the editing was just very instinctual, very much we don't need this, we don't need that. Cut, 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 cut. I regret nothing. All of those scenes still exist in the hard copy first draft that I have on my shelf behind me that's split across 2 notebooks, and at the very end of the second it's sort of double lined and the inside of the back cover is written on because I was running out of space that badly. And yeah, editing this was nowhere near as bad as I thought it was, because when I went in to edit this I thought, this is a really ambitious project with an entirely new structure and an entirely new genre with a sort of sweet, wholesome protagonist I've never really written before. How the heck am I going to? And it was not that bad. Once I got through the initial cuts, it was pretty tight. It was a pretty tidy first draft. I mean, that's something I've worked very hard on doing, is getting my first drafts tidy. And Mr. Nakagami, I think, is probably the first draft that was actually as tight as I wanted it to be. So that was nice. So now, in the big overall story of Mr. Nakagami, it's time to talk about Spark Pit. I know I talk about Spark Pit a lot on this podcast, but Mr. Nakagami is the book that won me Spark Pit, so I would be remiss not to mention it. I actually focused everything in Spark Pit, I built everything in Spark Pit around Mr. Nakagami. Everything. I thought, okay, well here's my basic sort of month-long structure of how I'm going to pitch everything. I need, this number of materials for this project, this number for this project, and I used Mr. Nakagami to make me a template of what materials I would need and how I was going to pitch them, because I had pitch templates and I used Mr. Nakagami for all of that. And when it came to the order I was going to pitch my manuscripts in, because I had 3 I was definitely going to pitch and Penstemons was a tentative 4th if I got it done in time, which I did. So I pitched that as well, but that was always going to be last because it was tentative. But with the original 3, I thought, which order am I going to pitch them in? Which one is going to be the most likely to win me the contract? And that's not necessarily about marketability, because that would have been an obvious Black Executioner. Like, that wouldn't even be a question, it would be Black Executioner first. It was, which manuscript do I think is, as they say in World, katana-proof? Which is the one where they couldn't possibly say no? Because believe me, I thought all of them were good enough to win, or I wouldn't have pitched them all. Simple as that. But which one would it be impossible to refuse? And that, I did it in the order that I thought was most irresistible. Mr. Nakagami was first, and it wasn't even a question, and that never changed. Black Executioner and Snakebite swapped actually more times than you might think, but Mr. Nakagami was always number 1. Always, because it shows off skill, it shows off soul. There's just so much to Mr. Nakagami. There are so many things about it that aren't expected. Black Executioner, you've got this badass veteran soldier who does badass things, and with Snakebite you've got this political thriller with this snarky arsehole protagonist who does, questionable things. And those are great, but those are much more typical of those genres. And I thought Mr. Nakagami has so many things that are typical in many ways, but so many things that aren't, and so much passion and so much life. There's just so much life in Mr. Nakagami. I thought, well, this is the one, it has to be. And in the end they were doing it by, if they interacted with your pitch, that was a full request. So it was full request or bust. And I got a full request on day 1. And ultimately, they didn't refuse. So I think I kind of judged it to perfection, even though I pitched every day afterwards, because commitment, and also at that point it was maybe sunk cost fallacy, in the sense of, well, I've made all this stuff, so I'm gonna use it. And when it comes to actually publishing Mr. Nakagami, this is all the official edits, the cover design, all of this sort of stuff. Very straightforward. Actually, the editing rounds were very simple, very cut and dry. It wasn't that much work, actually, which, with confidence, inspiring. I mean, I've done another round of edits after publishing Count the Stars, having learned some, Corner Crace grammar stuff that came up, and honestly, that was still the case in Mr. Nakagami. It was a lot of, actually, in this particular grammar case, you use this punctuation instead of this, and maybe there should be a semicolon here. Because, I mean, this is why I wanted editors, because I don't know this stuff. I mean, I do now, but I'm sure there will be more in future, and I certainly didn't going in. That's one of the main reasons I wanted to go with the press, because I would never know this stuff on my own. The main difficulty, honestly, was cover design. I went through so many cover designs for Mr. Nakagami. I went through like 8. Because I had so many different ideas because I wanted to, in many ways, stick to genre conventions, but then thought obviously Determined Ones is in several different genres, so what works for Mr. Nakagami won't work for this, and there needs to be cohesion. And then I drew this picture of Ai on a whim. I saw this cool reference and I thought, I'm going to draw Ai like that, and it was really, really cool. And I still love that picture, and I thought, okay, that's going to be the cover of Black Executioner, it's going to be that. And I thought, okay, so I need to draw Haru in that style and make that somehow work. And Haru just doesn't work in that style. He just doesn't look like Haru, he looked really, really wrong. And then I came across these paper textures that I use in marketing all the time. I bought them, and they're really good. And I thought, okay, well, I can use this and do a character-based thing here. And I went so far as to make mock-ups for all 8 spines using those paper textures. And it was honestly about 6 weeks before I needed to get the cover in, before I had a light bulb moment. Because I was looking at the existing cover concept and thought, there's just something about it I don't like. And then it hit me that I could have the scales. Because on the cover, Haru was holding a pair of scales. And that had always been a trouble for me because I always wanted a prop on the cover. You know, Ai has his weapon of choice, he has his katana, and Shinichi has his bow, and Cody also has his bow, and Curtis has his big falchion, and Helga has her axes, but Haru never really had a great prop. He always had the pen, because, you know, the pen is mightier than the sword, and that's very Haru. But it's so hard to see, it's so small. Especially when you've got small man Haru, the sort of pen he needs is tiny. He also just likes having a little pocket pen. That's something I've sort of picked up on. That doesn't appear on page, but he has a tiny little pen that he just carries around with him, and I like that. Pen prop just didn't work, especially when I had done other concepts to test it out with other Determined One books. I've done a concept of Ai, and I think I've done a concept of Hanzo and one of Isamu because he has his guitar, and Isamu was always a bit of the outlier with this. And it just looks so much better with all of them, and I thought, Mr. Nakagami deserves a really great cover. And this template, this formula, is just not working. Like, no matter how you cut it, it's fine, but it is fine. And I want better than that. So as soon as I had this realisation of the scales, I was like, we're running with that. And I wanted this really high contrast black and white, because that's cool. I'd just had some light bulb aesthetic decision moments that actually come from, and this is a bit left field, Vagabond. And for those that don't know what Vagabond is, and I don't blame you because I don't think my audience necessarily overlaps with Vagabond at all, it's a historical fiction manga series about Samurai Musashi Miyamoto. And it's awesome. I've got 2 books, I've read the first one. And the art style is just beautiful. It's not like typical manga. And I was like, damn, I want that. But I've also always loved the really hard cinema lighting, where you get the shot of a character's face and it's half in light, half in darkness. I've always loved that. And film noir aesthetic, I'll talk about this a lot more in the Charcoal Rain episode. I always loved that. So trying to sort of combine those things, you end up with the Mr. Nakagami cover, which doesn't make sense to anyone but me, I'm sure, but it's awesome and I love it, and I'm so glad I had that idea, and it's such an easy concept to work with. All of the rest of the Determined Ones, I have full concepts for everybody except Hanzo, I think. I have an idea for Hanzo, but I haven't really concepted that properly yet. And I'm really happy with how that cover looks. I'm so glad I went with it, even if it was a push to get it done at the death, it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it. But I wanted to touch a bit more on release ordering as well, because with a compendium, that is difficult. It's really difficult to figure out, and I'm going to do a full episode on this in the future at some point. I know better than to say it'll be this episode at this point in the schedule, but there isn't one. The thing is, with Mr. Nakagami being the book that won me my contract, my hand was forced into making this the first release. And it's not originally what I wanted, but I actually think that I lucked out with that one, that actually Mr. Nakagami is a great introduction to the Determined Ones, because you get an idea of the vibe of the Determined Ones, you get an idea of my writing and how voicey it is and how much it varies by character, honestly, especially if you've read Count the Stars and now Charcoal Rain. But you get a very full scope of different places in the world. Haru travels a lot, so you see Shukai in detail, obviously that's where he lives, but you see Malasa, you see Liera, you see Haraith, you see a lot of places that mattered to me. And you meet a lot of the Determined Ones, but you just meet a lot of characters. And there are so many questions that you get through Mr. Nakagami. There are so many places you can go, there are so many people you want to know more about. It just made sense. As much as I would originally wanted something else, I think the amount of questions that are inevitable to have after Mr. Nakagami is what makes it such a great opener. And as a little side note, it's also probably the lightest story of the Determined Ones, which sort of matters as well, because if I'd opened with Shadow on the Snow and something that dark and that brutal, I think that would be a lot more difficult. But last and certainly not least for this episode, I really do just want to thank some people for making the launch of Mr. Nakagami such a wonderful thing that happened. It was such... Launch day was just amazing, and throughout the entire campaign and beyond, people have been really supportive and a really big help, and it's just been very wholesome. So first and foremost, I have to thank my Hype Hero squad, who were my street team, effectively. I call it something slightly different for a reason, but the Hype Heroes were absolutely incredible, and I can't thank them enough. They all went above and beyond doing what they do. I even got thrown into one of their newsletters, and I had no idea that was going to happen, so that was amazing. I really can't thank you guys enough. But also just like all of my friends on the socials for all the support and all of the hype. Like, it's actually insane to think about how much support I got for such a wild book in such a weird genre for indie books. Like, indie thriller is such a small sect, and indie political thriller just kinda doesn't exist. So, yeah, that was crazy. I also want to give, and I know they don't listen to this, but a huge thank you to both my parents for being so supportive of my writing and me just scrolling away at notebooks in the evenings and at times long into the night, and for making release dates so awesome. Like, it's actually crazy how much effort they put into release day. Yeah, that was an insanely fun day, an insanely good day, and I just owe a lot to them in general, but when it comes to my writing and how supportive they've been, that means the world to me. It does. It makes this world more worth living in. But of course, I have to thank my publisher as well for taking a chance on something as wild as this book. And, you know, they've published thrillers before, but nothing like this. And, yeah, I really can't thank Shadowspark enough. They were my dream house before I pitched there, because their books always came out at such good quality. That was the house I always wanted to be with. And now it's the house I'm at, and I've got 3 works published through them, but my most important work is published through them, and a special thanks to Mandy at Shadowspark for being the ones who made the decision to take me on, and for requesting my full, but also for being my editor, because she was a fantastic editor, like genuinely 10 out of 10 stellar editor. Really respected what I'd done, made things clear, made things easy. Can't thank you guys enough. So, Mr. Nakagami is published, but it's not the only thing I've published. I mentioned already in this episode that I've got 2 novelettes out. I've got Count the Stars, which is related to the Determined Ones, and Charcoal Rain, which is not. These are featured in Shadowspark anthologies, Cozy-ish and Dream Court, respectively. Highly recommend you get a copy of both of those, because they're both just full of extremely talented authors, honestly. Links to all of that will be in the description. There will also be links to me on my various socials that I am on to differing degrees. If you are a fan of the podcast, Instagram is the place to be. You'll get advance notice of what the episode of the week is, because at some point I have to decide what it is, and fun little bonus content as and when. I never really know what I'm doing on Instagram, so you'll get wild, random stuff. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. If you are interested in my writing, want to get semi-live updates, I do writing updates just about every morning, and maybe join in on the monthly Thrills prompts. Twitter is the place to be. I am JadeBlack21 on there. The place I'm second most active, probably, is Pinterest. That is a place where you get a lot of art stuff. There's a whole bunch of art for Mr. Nakagami on there, some of which is exclusive to there. You can see all the snippets I've posted of Mr. Nakagami on there, one-lines, weird graphics, all sorts of fun stuff on Pinterest. There's some world-building stuff on there too. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. I also do technically exist on Blue Sky, but it's my game dev platform, and I have not made time for game dev in a while. So you can follow me on there if you're so inclined. I'm JadeBlack21, but I'm probably not going to be there, if I'm entirely honest. And last but certainly not least, if you are published, or well on the way, please do get in touch. I would love to be a part of your journey and give you an interview, give you some hype. I'm jade42black@gmail.com. Please check the list in the description and include that in your initial contact. It just makes everything a lot easier for both of us, because I can just say, yeah, this podcast is a fit, or maybe, no, it's not. We can just do everything in as few messages as possible that way. Few things to note. Indie and South Pub, you are the people I want to hear from. Trad Pub, I will consider you. I am prioritising indie dark lit, because there are so few spaces for indie dark lit, indie thriller, indie horror, indie mystery, all of it. There are very, very, very few spaces, so I'm trying to be the change I want to see. And that's about everything for today. So until next time, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like, or commenting, or subscribing. It really does help the channel a lot. All music is done by me. Copyright Jade Black 2025.